My name is Maureen Holland, and I actually have a lot of names, 5 of them. Maureen Adonicus Snowdy Truex Holland, and I am a graduate of Vermont Law School a long time ago. Longer than I think sometimes. 1989, I went to the University of Vermont before I went to Vermont Law School. And a lot of people, when they go to law school, they study, if they're going to go to law school, undergraduate, they study law, pre-law. Well, I studied agricultural and resource economics. So I have an undergraduate Bachelor of Science degree in agricultural and resource economics, and then I went to law school, graduated cum laude in Vermont Law School. And the law school is a separate private law school. And since then, I've just been working, practicing, still trying to get good at how to do law, how to represent people, how to serve. I'm located in Memphis, Tennessee. I have a law firm. I'm sort of the law firm with a paralegal, primarily focusing on employment law. So sort of vast majority of my work, plaintiffs' employment work. So I represent employees who are having employment issues with their employer, whether that's a private employer or whether that's the government. And I still do some probate, small amount, and some divorce work, uncontested, and we'll be doing some collaborative divorce work. I'm known, and I hold myself out as a holistic attorney. And for me, being a holistic attorney is a fairly straightforward concept. It has 2 main components. The first component is that the tradition of law has a lot of good aspects. And I know the public at large is sort of frustrated with lawyers and the system, but there are really some good things that come from the learned side of being a lawyer. There are good things come from the experienced side of being a lawyer. So being a holistic lawyer is bringing back into focus many of the sort of best practices of law, getting back to civility, getting back to humanity in the law, getting back to respect in the law, the things that I think the general public expects lawyers to be, but often finds that they're not. So it is a conscious focus on that piece. The second piece is that we now know a lot about problem solving from other disciplines. So it is making law multidisciplinary in a very conscious way. So bringing information about the role of apology and how that works, information about anger and frustration and the emotional side of the law and how learning about that or having some knowledge about that can help you solve problems. And so those 2 components together, for me, make holistic law. It's a sort of a more whole approach to the practice of law, a more whole approach to client problems, and I think a more helpful, healthy approach to the practice of law. I used to be a traditionally practicing, or I think I heard a term recently, conventional attorney. I was a conventional attorney, and conventional attorneys in this day and age tend to focus on winning, tend to focus on getting the most for their client, whatever that means. If that's money, then getting the most money. If that's a good deal, then getting the best deal. If you have to write a lease, then getting a lease that favors your client. It's always about focusing on getting the best situation, the best result, the best amount of money, the most for your client. And I used to practice that way fairly effectively. And I started getting, I had cases where my client might get a lot of money, huge sum of money, maybe more than $500,000, and they would be unhappy. I'm thinking, they've gotten all this money. I mean, that was my job, right? Get them all this money, and yet they're not any happier than before they even started the lawsuit. And that sort of started wearing on me a little. And I think also just my own personal development sort of dovetailed with that realization that perhaps there's something more than just the end result that matters in the practice of law. And so in my own personal work in thinking about what matters to me and thinking about what's important to me and thinking about how I relate to others, how I relate to this world, I had an insight, an epiphany. And I realized for myself that I didn't want to really cause harm to others, and that if you truly don't want to harm anyone, then, and if you look at that in every aspect of your life, you can see how this thing you didn't, harm them tremendously, but maybe a little bit. And is there a way not to do that anymore? And if I started looking at that in my personal life, and I started looking at that in my professional life, and I realized that the practice of law, the way I had been practicing it, had a sort of harm component where I didn't really worry about, did the way in which I questioned the other side upset them? Did the manner in which I obtained the money make anyone distressed? Not distressed because they had done something wrong, but distressed in the manner in which I did it. Because, for instance, cross-examination is a fairly hostile process where if you have a trial and you have to question somebody else's witness, they ask them very friendly questions, and then my job, as I saw it at the time, was to get up and ask them fairly hostile questions. Why is that? Why didn't you do that? Didn't you just say this a minute ago? Were you lying then, or are you lying now? And it's designed in many ways to be somewhat humiliating and embarrassing. And I thought, is there a way to get to the same result without having to humiliate or embarrass someone purposefully? If they've done something wrong, that may come to light, and I don't have a problem with that. I don't think that's a problem. I think that's a way to get things corrected. But that's different from sort of focusing on these tactics which do work. They work sometimes very well, but I thought, is there another way to accomplish the same task in a more mature way, in a more sort of helpful way, maybe even in a more efficient way? So I started thinking through that, and I studied the work of Patricia Sun, who has done a lot of work on whole brain thinking. And I was able to, in studying her work, realize how readily the work she has done translated into the practice of law, and how that translated into practicing law as a whole brain thinking lawyer, as a person focused on the whole of the client. And that was really useful. So I kind of made this leap after my epiphany. I get the input from Patricia, I am doing my own work, and the result of that is sort of a leap forward into realizing there is another way to practice. It is more helpful, it is more humane, it is more kind in many ways, but not about being a pushover, but being about sort of more respectful of all the interests that are involved. I think with anything, if you're learning it from the inside out, it's a much more labor-intensive process than if someone comes to you and says, okay, I'm going to train you how to do this task, and this is the structure you need, and these are the areas that you're going to want to focus on, and this is how you can improve in that process. When you're learning from the inside out, there is no structure already in place. You have to develop that yourself. You have to figure out, where is it that I should focus my time and energy and attention? What skills do I really need? How do I develop those skills? And that's, I think, a very challenging task. So for me, I had an advantage, I think, because Patricia's work had done some of that structuring in whatever field. She didn't have a particular field. She's a philosopher. And in her philosophy, it doesn't really matter what field you're in. It just gives you some framework, some ability to frame issues, to frame problems that helps one then discern, how do I take the next step? So I used the framework that she had sort of created from years of her own work, thought about it and realized that would be a very useful framework and would help me progress, and it did.